It's now time to have a chat with Dr. Mark Fulcher, who is the Medical Director at New Zealand Football. Mark, hey, thanks very much for giving up your time. First things first, is your son okay? I must admit, I got a bit of a scare. We'd teed you up for the 7 o'clock hour, and then I get a, hey, mate, sorry, at A&E. So I just hope everything's okay with you.
Yeah, no problems. We're all good.
Sweet. Well, Mark, look, if I could start with a little bit of your background and some of the work you've been doing, particularly in football and particularly with head injuries, because it's something we sort of chatted about, bumping into each other not so long ago, and I thought it was quite fascinating.
So, yeah, look, I'm a sport and exercise physician, so I spend most of my life treating injuries, but I've got a real passion for trying to prevent injury. So a lot of our work at New Zealand Football has been around injury prevention, and working with ACC to roll out injury prevention programs. And so that's kind of a big work in progress. But one of the things that we're very passionate about is trying to reduce the impact that head injuries have across all sports, actually, not just football. And it's really a partnership with the 4 major sporting codes: rugby, rugby league, netball, and football, and ACC. So that's, I guess, where that work's kind of going.
So, Mark, are you a part of the sort of Fit4Football as well, for want of a better, which is that sort of...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so Fit4Football is our injury prevention sort of medical brand through New Zealand Football. And one of the things we have there is a program called the 11 Plus,
right,
which has been rebranded by ACC into the Sports Smart Injury Prevention Warm-Up.
Right.
And that's been a big piece of our work. So if we can get you to warm up differently, we can prevent the risk of all injuries in football by about 30%. And severe injuries, so things like tearing the ACL in your knee, by about 50%. So that's one of the projects. It's not necessarily directly related to concussion.
Yeah, so this is so that's just by warming up properly.
Yeah, so that's by moving differently. So instead of running around and stretching, if we can get you to do a little bit of running around, a bit of strengthening, a bit of balancing, you can have a massive impact on the risk of injury. So if you think about the ACL injury, most people have heard of that. That's an injury that's pretty devastating. Usually you have an operation, normally keeps you out of football for about a year.
Yep.
There's a big risk of arthritis later in life. So it's a really crappy injury. And if you're looking at professional football, it's about 1 injury per team per year. And if you're looking at the cost, the direct cost to New Zealand is about $50 million in sort of surgical and medical costs per year.
Wow.
And so if you can prevent half of those injuries by warming up in a different way, it's a no-brainer, really. So the personal morbidity for the guy who gets injured, and then the cost to the nation, we could be doing a lot with $25 million.
Culturally, Mark, how do we change? I don't know if I know at the elite level it's very well scrutinised, very well monitored. How do we sort of change things culturally? And you must have having played football against you, whatever. There's the weekend warrior like myself who'll get a little knock and you'll shake it off and you go, no, I'm hard as, bro, yeah, sweet, or whatever. Well, how do we change that? Because there's a lot of guys see it every weekend. Yeah,
it's really hard. So, but I think it's just about keeping at it. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. So I talk to people about it whenever I can. So I've turned your segment on concussion into a segment into injury prevention. So it's sneaky in itself.
I can live with it, mate. It's all right.
Yeah. So then it's about speaking people's languages. So, like if you're 35-year-old or 40-year-old recreational footballer, you're not that worried about necessarily performance, but you just don't want to go home and tell your wife or your partner that you're injured, or tell your boss that you can't come to work. So there's a real reason there. So if you're a young kind of up-and-coming footballer that wants to be a professional or an all-white, your main reason there is that if you tear your ACL, you've got almost zero chance of becoming a professional. So if you're in an English Premier League academy and you tear your ACL, the percentage chance of you becoming a professional at that club is close to zero.
Wow.
So it's about speaking different people's languages and then being fairly pragmatic. So the program that we have, not everyone wants to do the program, but if we can get them to do bits of it, then we know that we can be effective there. So one of the exercises is a hamstring strengthening exercise. So if you do that exercise once a week, you can reduce the risk of a hamstring injury by 50%. And if you've torn your hamstring before, and every team has got some poor schmuck that tears their hamstring a couple of times a year, you can reduce your risk there by 85%. So just doing one little piece of the program makes a huge difference in the way that people kind of enjoy the sport. So they get much more enjoyment out of it, much more likely to keep playing. And football's great like that. It's a sport you can keep playing to your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then you can graduate into some walking football if you fancy it.
I saw that I saw the article on that the other day. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen it before. It's quite big in France. But it's funny you touched on the point that you made about speaking people's language, because one of the rules I have with my wife Melissa is if you want to go out there, and I might have already told you this, not on air though, but the rule that we have.
Round, Dennis.
Hey, what's that?
This could be dangerous ground.
It could be, especially if she's tuned in to listen. She's going, look, kids, listen to your dad. He's on the radio. Yeah. But one of the rules with Melissa is as long as you don't come home moaning. So I can't come home injured or whatever. It's just, I don't want to get a phone call from your teammate that's driving you to A&E or whatever, or driving your car to A&E and you've gone somewhere else in an ambulance. Or whatever it might be, as long as you can go and do whatever you want, as long as you don't come home crying that you can't play with the kids the next day, or, because your back's stiff. So it's funny, because that's my language.
In a different way. Yeah, by warming up in a different way, you can reduce the risk of bad things happening to you by a substantial amount. So I would really be keen for anyone that's interested, look at the Fit4Football website, or look at the ACC SportsMart website. There's sort of video that you can download. There's some flyers that you can download to learn how to do it. And we've got an injury prevention team that can come up to your club or to your school and teach your coaches how to do it as well. So it's a really good initiative.
So, Mark, look, in terms of your interest, if I can bring you to the concussion thing, because when we first started talking, you were saying, look, I'm off to educate some people. I think you were going over, was it the Caribbean or something, to give a lecture about, which is cool in itself. But, thanks for the +1 invite, by the way. But, it's like, this is my colleague, Dr. Dennis. You should imagine if I was a doctor, God help us. But
I think that's how my friends feel as well.
Yeah, but how when you've got to sort of deliver in that sense, so you're delivering to other doctors and other world leaders in the field, like, do you like I'd crap myself, to be honest. I'd be sitting there going, these guys might punch holes right through my whole thesis.
I was thinking about talking on the radio.
Right.
When I first started doing a couple of radio interviews, I was absolutely terrible at it. But,
okay.
I think it's a learned skill. So
you're getting better, by the way. I don't like you steering me off topic, though, but that's no.
If you're passionate about what you're talking about, and if you kind of know your topic, then it's not so bad. It's definitely nerve-wracking, and you're never totally sure whether people want to hear what you're talking about as well. So I guess it's not so different from your job.
What's the research telling you in terms of head knocks, and where are we at?
Yeah, so look, I mean, my research and my interest is more around implementation of programs and prevention. But
okay, gotcha.
I'm very much engaged in the concussion space because our clinic treats a lot of it, and it's something that I think that's kind of, there's increasing awareness. So I think in the media, the reporting kind of often is reporting the negatives. It's sort of saying, almost sort of scaremongering, saying, look, this is a very scary, terrible injury that everyone's going to have long-term consequences from. And that's not really what the research shows. The research shows that I think for most people, they have one concussion. If it's managed well, we're not expecting any long-term consequences from that. But then there are certainly people that have more significant head injuries or have recurring head injuries, and those are the guys that I'd be more concerned about.
Right.
You read about the stuff in the NFL about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that's CTE. There is actually no proven cause and effect relationship between head injuries and long-term brain problems. I think if you are kind of a reasonable man, though, and you sort of read the science, it's likely that people do have head injuries that lead to long-term problems. But my view is that the majority of us, if we have a concussion through our sporting life, which I have, I don't think that leaves a long-lasting legacy for most people. And so what I kind of tell my patients and what I tell people when they ask me about concussion and brain injury is that if you have a concussion, make sure that you get it treated properly. And so that requires some visits to a doctor who's interested in concussion. It requires a break away from the aggravating activity. So it might be sport, or it might be going to work, or it could be looking at your phone and Facebooking, that sort of thing.
Right.
And then have a planned return to sport program so that you're not going straight back into playing football or rugby where the risk of injury is highest. You might do some running first, you might do a bit of stuff in the gym, you might do some non-contact training, and then at each of those stages, if things are going well, we can progress you through. And then if you're someone that goes on to have recurring head injuries, so you have 2 or 3 or 4, then I would be starting to be, certainly if it was my own kids, I'd be starting to think that they're in the wrong sport. Maybe we should be looking at something else.
Gotcha.
So I think the science sort of says there's definitely cause for concern. There's definitely cause to be careful. But I think, calls to ban tackling, calls to ban heading, don't play sport. I think those are kind of unreasonable suggestions based on the evidence that we have so far.
It's funny you say that because like a lot of parents, I coach a kids team in football.
Yep.
And they're about to turn 9 this year, and if I'm lucky enough to be selected, I might get to coach them again. And heading is one part as a parent. You want to do, for me anyway. The conscientious side of me goes, right, Friday night I'm going to do all the research that I possibly can how to head it correctly, because you don't want to be the guy that incorrectly teaches a kid how to head a ball. If there is the possibility of some consequence to it if you don't teach them correctly.
And look, I think that's one of the things that there's a real absence of kind of information in the middle ground. So, like if you're a parent that's concerned and you don't want anything to go wrong with your kid, you've got the option of saying, well, look, I've heard from some guy down at the football club there's no problems, or I read in the paper that it's going to cause brain damage. And so there's not a lot in the middle. So that's one of the things that we're working in at the moment, both in our clinic and with New Zealand Football and ACC, to try and provide some more balanced information. So my kids are the same. I've got 3 little boys. The oldest is 6, so he really hasn't gotten too involved in football yet. He's playing futsal and whatnot. But I don't have them. I don't have any problem with them playing football or rugby league under the current rules. I sort of think a common sense approach is you probably wouldn't spend a whole evening doing heading drills. No. Football is funny because the kids can't kick the ball in the air until 9 or 10 with any sort of regularity, so they're not hitting anyway. And so I think it kind of happens organically. And then there is some evidence to say that if you hit the ball properly, so if you are engaging your neck muscles and you're kind of putting your head in the right place rather than having the ball bounce off your head, then the force that gets transmitted to your brain is less.
Right.
So I think teaching good technique is important. But I would be encouraging people to do maybe 5 or 10 headers a session, something like that, as opposed to old school, you stand in the line and run through and do 30 headers and then you go straight into another heading drill and something else.
Yeah.
So it's just it's common sense, really.
So in terms of 2018, what does that hold for you? And sort of how do you implement things, just that next step or that little bit further? Like if we talked again at this time next year, if I was invited back to Radio Sport over the December period and I gave you a buzz and I went, how did 2018 go for you, Mark? What would you, what is the sort of plan for yourself?
Yeah, so our main plans this year through football, we've got a few initiatives. One, we're running an injury prevention meeting for health professionals. So that happens in February. So it's actually not just for doctors, it's for anyone that's really interested in sports medicine. So that happens in February. So again, if you want to learn a bit more about that, there's a website link on Fit4Football. But we've got some international experts coming over, including a guy called Yuji Dvorak, who until recently has been the medical director of FIFA, or FMAC. So it's a good opportunity to disseminate knowledge amongst health professionals. So they're often the first point of care. If you're a physio on the sideline and you see someone you think are concussed, making sure that they know what the best things to do are. So that's one. Second is we're running a program to try and get AEDs into football clubs. So we've secured funding to give away 200. So that leaves us another about 270 clubs to work on.
Right.
So it's trying to prevent sudden cardiac arrest and sudden cardiac death, which sounds rare, but if you look in the media, it's a couple of cases in football a year.
I was going to say, Mark, I've met 3 guys, and one of them was at Western Springs, which is a club in Auckland, and I asked the guy, I said, what was it like? And he goes, it's like someone just switches you off. He was dead. He was dead for I don't know how long, and luckily they just bought the machine.
He's a fantastic guy. So again, on our website, there's some video with him. He literally was resuscitated by his mates who they saw their friend in trouble and they resuscitated him.
Yeah.
So our program is really just about having a go, but for clubs to have a plan. One of our New Zealand football staff members had a cardiac arrest a couple of months ago, literally a couple of weeks ago. I sit next to him on a Monday morning in the office.
Yeah.
24 years old, plays in the New Zealand futsal team, had a cardiac arrest. So essentially there are two groups of people in sport that have a cardiac arrest, young active guys like that who probably, well, most commonly have an underlying cardiac problem, like Fabrice Mwamba playing for Bolton.
Right.
Incidentally, Ryan Nelson was playing in that game, and so if you talk to him, you can really feel the impact that had on him.
Yeah.
But then there's you and me, the sort of 41-year-old male.
40-something's pretty good, mate.
Not a good sign when you can't remember. Who, we've potentially got some blockage of our coronary arteries, and we could have a cardiac arrest. So that would be a fantastic thing to talk about in a year, getting 475 AEDs out into football clubs.
That'd be great.
And then the other one is I've talked to you about the 11 plus, but we're just about to launch a validated program in kids called the 11 plus kids.
Right.
And so basically it's about teaching our kids to move a little bit better and to try and prevent them getting injured. So we can have a similar impact with them by getting them to move differently. So instead of running around and stretching, we get them to do some roly-polies and crab walking and things like that. So kind of age-appropriate kind of fun activities that you can put in with the rest of your training session. So those really probably are the 1, 2, and 3 things I'd like to be standing back and saying those have been a success.
I just can't believe. Did you say you said 50 million on ACL operations and stuff like that?
Mate, 50 million is the cost of, say, the MRI scan, the doctor visit, and the surgery. But if you start looking at the future costs, so the guy might need a knee replacement, might need another surgery, might have time off work or not be able to go back to their work.
Yep,
that's probably another 100 million a year. So it's probably a $150 million problem per year. And 70% of that is happening in football, rugby league, and netball, and touch rugby. So if you can do injury prevention well in those 5 sports, then you're going to save a lot of hassle and a lot of money. So ACC is doing just an awesome job there. There's been a real change in focus there, and they're very, very engaged in prevention.
Yeah, it is. It's the key, isn't it? And I think it's as you touched on, it's the key across everything. If we can get people just thinking a bit smarter, because I've torn my hammy 2-3 times. Which,
Dennis, I can sort that out for you.
I have to come and say, yeah. Well, you know my hips buggered, so that's somewhere down the track. But I'm trying to delay that as much as possible. But anyway, we'll talk about my medical history on another show. But yeah, look, Mark, I appreciate you giving up your time and having a chat to us. And look, best of luck with everything, and trying to implement everything. I really think, in particular, the AED thing across look, if we could go that next step after next year, so we get all the football clubs, and then we can implement it in other clubs as well, other sports. It'd be great.
I totally agree. I mean, the thing about football clubs is they're a community resource. So some loans we've given away so far, it's not just football that's played. It's football, it's rugby, it's cricket during the summer. So it's a community resource. Yeah,
no, it'll be great. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much, mate, and Happy New Year there, and much appreciated in terms of your time. Dr. Mark Fulcher, who is the Medical Director at New Zealand Football.